right. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I wanted to start by looking at the newest composition that I've been working on, which you can see on the screen here. This portion of the Landmarks project is tentatively titled Empire. And what I'm thinking about here is this juxtaposition of the text, one of the texts that I've been inspired by for quite a long time by Jorge Luis Borges. It's a very short story about the idea of a map that covers the entirety of a civilization with a one-to-one copy of itself. And this idea that they were so obsessed with creating the most perfect map that the map became as large as the thing that it was trying to map. And I'm really interested in this when we're thinking about facial recognition, because as you can see, what's going on beneath that text is actually a one-to-one mapping, right, of this point plot map onto my face, right? So how can we learn or think about this imagining of a map as big as the thing it's mapping when that is actually something that is going on right now? And in fact, some of the data being collected about us really begins to create this entity, a data body for ourselves that in some ways exceeds the limits of our own body and becomes larger than ourselves. And so that's what this portion of the work is about, is thinking about that and then continuing to connect that to a more specific trans experience by linking it to Sandy Stone's work with the Empire Strikes Back post-transsexual manifesto, wherein she's talking about here that bodies are screens on which we are projected, on which we see projected the momentary settlements that emerge from ongoing struggles over beliefs and practices within the academic and medical communities. These struggles play themselves out in arenas far removed from the body. And so this idea that we are subjected to and become sites for these political contestations is really key to this work. And I think it's really key to understanding why it's important to think through facial recognition and some of the harms that it might reproduce. So I wanted to actually go about this today in a slightly different way by actually doing a manual version of this facial recognition. So we see this pink or magenta rather, and cyan wireframe here on the actual page, and then this other still image reference off to the side. And what I'm going to do today is I'm actually just going to go through and manually kind of become the facial recognition software and do that process on the image that we see on the screen here. There is this very specific reason why I've chosen this image, and I'll talk about that as we go along. But to start with, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and I'm just going to start doing this. So I generated a list of rules that are human readable over here based on the way that the facial recognition software I'm using maps out landmarks. So I'm going to go ahead and read that first. So the facial landmark rules are that the brows have 5 points, as we see here, and 4 lines each. Eyes have 6 points and 6 lines each. The nose has 9 points and 8 lines, 4 points for the bridge to the tip of the nose, and 5 points from the left to the right nostril. The lips have 20 points and 20 lines, 10 points for the lower lip. For each lip, it is 5 points on the outer edge, 3 points on the inner edge, and the corners overlap. And finally, the jaw has 17 points and 16 lines, and there are 8 per side ending at around the ear. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here and start with the brows. So again, it starts with 5 points. So one of the reasons I decided to do this is as I work on the next composition for the project, I'm thinking about moving towards some still image work. and working with the still image engine that goes along with the live engine that I've been working with. And to also think about ways in which I can call for participants to think about performing these kind of processes themselves. So here. One of the things that I find fascinating is that in order to make any of these things possible, in order to make any of these facial recognition technologies work, you have to have a set of data that has been processed by a person, right? And so even though we think of it as machine learning or artificial intelligence, depending on what level you're talking about, a lot of it still relies on human labor in some way, shape, or form, and human perception, really. And so if we think about that, we can start to, I think, pretty quickly understand where the problems might lie in relying on humans with their biases to create these things. So now I'm down to the eyes, which is 6 points, and if I look back at my reference image, it looks like we got the corners. And then these equidistant points on the top and bottom. So these are things that we do all the time. We're kind of constantly, you know, recognizing faces, understanding that something is a face. There's also, you know, the whole phenomenon of faces in places. So by making an algorithm for this, it kind of actually, for me, highlights this idea that there's this kind of really remarkable thing that our brain does all the time without us knowing it that is very, very difficult to actually get a computer to do. So now moving on to the nose. There are 4 points from the bridge to the tip of the nose, so I'm going to put those in first, and then 2 in between. All right, looks like the stream dropped there for a second. Hopefully we're back. Continuing here from the nose, part of what I'm fascinated with this is just this idea that when we're thinking about automating something like facial recognition, there's all sorts of decisions that end up getting made that seem really benign, like you know, where is the edge of the face, where is the edge of the nose, and all of these things feel very much like arbitrary, like what I'm making right now. But if we think about how that then gets translated into things such as the emotional detection, these actually really become very, very important questions and very important problems. So I'm going to move here. So as I think about how to communicate and talk about these issues and these things I'm interested in, part of what I'm thinking through is this idea that, like, you know, inviting folks along to do these practices and to think about the choices that they would make if they were labeling these things as a way to get us to start critically interrogating how that quickly starts to expose just how complicated it would be to do this in a very fair, ethical way. Keep going here. So the reason that I actually chose the image that I'm using today is because while it looks as though it's just a random stock photo of somebody's face, it is in fact, this image is actually in fact completely fake. So it's totally generated by a different artificial intelligence. So while this looks very reasonably like a human being, what this actually is it's from a website called This Person Does Not Exist. And what this website is it's an example of using artificial intelligence that has been fed 70,000 high-resolution images of a face to show how artificial intelligent systems can actually generate new content. And so while this face looks like a normal photograph, it is in fact a complete composite image, and there is no actual person linked to this. So this is a bunch of different parts of different elements of what the computer now thinks a human face looks like that have been meshed into a brand new face that does not actually reference any real singular human being on the planet. This image is quite believable. There's one part where it starts to fall apart here around the nostril, but in general, these images become very, very believable very, very quickly. And so that's why I chose to actually do this facial recognition on this today, because I was really fascinated by this idea of what does it mean to have a human do a facial recognition process on a face that was made by a non-human to look like a human. And I think that really does just get at the complexities that are going on here. Is a lot of the work I've done so far is focused on identifying faces, but there is also this other field, this other part of this work wherein people are in fact generating faces as well. So what happens then if I put this image of a composite face into a algorithm that's meant to read the face? Then suddenly I have one algorithm reading the intentions of another algorithm, and there's actually no face of an actual human involved in that process, and yet it all comes from human labor and human data in order to make all of these things happen. And what really ends up happening here is that you just start to go down a very complicated rabbit hole that allows you to start to see why it's important to think critically of these technologies, and why it's important to really start to maybe imagine a different way forward, wherein it's not how quickly or how accurately can we detect a face, but should we be detecting a face at all? Are there ways to do these things ethically that don't actually reproduce violences or reproduce people's biases in some form or fashion? So I'm going to go here. So we've just finished the lips, and now I'm going to go to the jaw, which again is 17 points and 16 lines with 1 point in the center and then 8 on each side ending at the ear. Of course, can't see the ear on this side, but I do have a slight reference as to where that might be. So if I'm looking at the bottom here, And so part of the reason I wanted to do this process today as well was also because one of the next compositions for the project is going to be based on this idea of me being the facial recognition algorithm, or you being the facial recognition algorithm. To think about this idea that in order for any of this to function, the algorithm needs to have seen thousands and thousands of faces, needs to know what a face is, what isn't a face, needs to be able to recognize these things. And these are all things that we do for ourselves on a daily basis by rote. So in some ways we have our own sort of algorithmic modes of identifying people and things in our life. And so I think that there's something interesting about recontextualizing this very base human process in reference to these algorithms. Because I think it can also seem very much inhuman, the way that these things work. But when in fact, all of these technological systems are made by human hands and human minds, and who gets to actually make those algorithms and who has access to do this kind of research really reflects the types of things that happen. So having more diverse opinions and viewpoints and having a more critical understanding of this technology is critical in making sure that as we move forward, we're not actually reproducing the inequities that already exist in the world. And so again, here's the final result of the facial recognition. Again, doing this myself, very inefficient, took something like 20 minutes here to do. But I do think that it's worth thinking about how quickly the computer does something versus how we do it, and what it might look like. Let's actually just add another background here. So you can get this sort of extracted version of what that might look like and how that can mimic what's actually already going on the site. So again, this image was created using a neural network that can be found here. thispersondoesnotexist.com. If you go on there, you can hit refresh, and you can see it will just continue to generate these images. And if you click, it will show you how exactly it was done and how to actually train it yourself. So one of the other things that I'm looking into, both for this residency and beyond, is what it might mean to actually train an algorithm to generate these things myself. And then what does it mean to ask one algorithm to do a recognition process on images created from another? And how does that conversation, that cross-conversation, maybe get us to start thinking about these things? Again, all of these people, very believable, very much seeming real, but in fact are all not actual human beings, but rather composite images, synthetic images created from a generative adversarial neural network that creates these things. All right, so what I'm going to do to end is I'm going to go back to my own website here, just talk a little bit about what I've done, how to navigate through the project as it exists so far, and thinking about where it might go from here a little bit. So just give me one moment here. All right, So one of the things that I've added recently to the project is I added this little notification that pops up to let people know that the facial recognition is happening. I try my best throughout the project to like really give people a fair warning that the facial recognition process is going to happen, and also that by using the site you're not actually making the facial recognition algorithm any better, and that you're not improving the algorithm in any way, and also that your data isn't being stored, because I think it's important to keep open about those conversations. So this is the main page, which you've all seen if you've been following the project. It still contains the facial recognition. One of the things I've done on the back end is to simplify this code a little bit so that it runs a little bit faster, so that the tracking is a little bit easier. I currently like how scrambled this emotion detector is on the bottom. On one of the other pages that I'll develop later, I'd like to have a slower emotional detector that doesn't flash between all of these different images. But for this first page, I like how erratic it is and how much it changes, especially when you're talking. And then down at the bottom are the links to the two main compositions that I've been working on. First, stages, which I talked about last week, where I've taken the facial recognition project and broken it up into smaller chunks, wherein we start with this discovery or the facial detection, and then we move to the mapping, which is the points, and then the defining being the emotions, and then the exploit, which is left initially blank or intentionally blank here, as a way to gesture towards the fact that we can't actually know all the different ways that this technology might be used to impact us. So one of the things that I've been doing color palette wise with this project is I've been really trying to work with the colors that already came with the software. So trying to stay true to the way the software was meant to be visualized, as a way to work with this sort of computational vision, or this very efficient way of visualizing things. So they use RGB colors and CMYK colors. And so the reason that we see these colors existing as they do here is I was hoping to have the background fade to the same blue as the frame, and the background fade to the same cyan as the lines, and the background fade to the same black as the background here, so that you end up with these kind of data points floating in space. And the same thing happens when we move over to the Empire page. Here we have this moment where you see yourself, and then you're snapped into the wireframe, and that wireframe again, those colors are reflected in the title, they're reflected in the text, and then to complement that, I'm using the yellow to sort of complete that CMYK look. So this piece, again, the most recent composition is much more text heavy, and it has a lot more, it's more reference text, but I'm really interested in adding those sorts of external conversations, because my own work, I deal very heavily in text, and I'm really interested and inspired by text, and so I like to bring that into the actual work as much as possible. So the very last thing, as I wrap up here, if you have questions, again, you can put them in the chat. But the last thing I wanted to mention was you can go on and look at both the code and the live website. So the live website is here, but you can also look at the code. And the README here grows as the piece grows. So every time I add a new page, I'm adding a new listing here, so you can see an explanation of what's going on in the actual code, as well as development goals, notes, ideas, and issues that talk about exactly why the project is in the state that it's currently in, and then links, of course, at the bottom. So if you're interested in how this works, what's going on underneath the hood, it's really easy to come on here and get an explanation of what's going on. This is still in development, of course, but I have also tried to put comments into the code itself, so that it's easy to understand why things are listed the way that they're listed, and how the code is actually functioning. But that's all that I have for today, so if there aren't any questions, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. I appreciate everyone stopping by and having a listen. And I look forward to updating you all again in 2 weeks.